Stress is often spoken about as if it were an external force, something that arrives from the outside world and presses upon us. But if we observe closely, we begin to notice that stress is not just what happens to us, it is what happens within us, a deeply biological conversation between the mind and the body, a language written in hormones, electrical signals, and subtle shifts in physiology that shape how we feel, think, and ultimately live. Imagine for a moment that your body is not merely reacting randomly, but is instead following an ancient survival script, one that was designed long before modern life, long before deadlines and notifications and social expectations, a script that evolved to protect you from immediate danger, from predators, from threats that were physical and visible, and in that world, stress was not a problem, it was a solution. When early humans encountered danger, the body would initiate a rapid and coordinated response, often called the fight or flight response, driven by the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, releasing hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, increasing heart rate, sharpening focus, redirecting blood flow toward muscles, and preparing the organism to either confront or escape the threat. And in those moments, stress was not harmful. It was essential. It was life-saving. It was the difference between survival and extinction. But now consider the world we live in today, where the threats are rarely physical, rarely immediate, and often psychological, a missed opportunity, a critical comment, financial pressure, social comparison, uncertainty about the future, and yet the body does not distinguish between a real physical threat and a perceived psychological one. It responds in the same ancient way, activating the same systems, releasing the same hormones, preparing for action even when no physical action is required. This is where the conflict begins, because the stress response that was designed for short bursts of survival becomes activated repeatedly, sometimes constantly, without resolution, without release, and over time, what was once protective becomes disruptive. The body, in its attempt to help, begins to suffer under the weight of its own mechanisms. If we slow down and examine what happens during chronic stress, we see a cascade of changes that affect nearly every system in the body. The cardiovascular system experiences increased pressure as the heart works harder and blood vessels constrict. The immune system becomes dysregulated, sometimes suppressed, making the body more vulnerable to infections, sometimes overactive, contributing to inflammation. The digestive system slows down or becomes erratic, because in a state of perceived danger, digestion is not a priority, energy is diverted elsewhere, and even the brain itself begins to change. Structures like the amygdala become more reactive, amplifying fear and anxiety, while areas like the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and rational thought, may become less effective, making it harder to think clearly, to plan, to regulate emotions. It is almost as if the body is being pulled into a constant state of readiness, a state that was never meant to be sustained. Yet what makes this even more fascinating is that stress is not inherently negative. It is not an enemy to be eliminated. It is a signal, a form of communication, a way for the body to tell you that something requires attention, something matters, something is out of balance, and when understood in this way, stress becomes less of a threat and more of a guide. There is a concept in physiology known as homeostasis, the idea that the body is constantly working to maintain internal stability, balancing temperature, pH levels, energy supply, and countless other variables, and stress can be seen as a disruption to this balance, a push away from equilibrium, but also as a trigger for adaptation, because the body is remarkably resilient. It is designed not only to survive stress but to learn from it, to become stronger in response to manageable challenges. This is why short-term stress, often called acute stress, can sometimes enhance performance, improve focus, increase motivation. It can sharpen the mind and energize the body, but only when it is followed by recovery, only when the system is allowed to return to baseline. Without recovery, the cycle remains incomplete, and the body begins to accumulate what scientists refer to as allostatic load, the wear and tear that results from chronic exposure to stress hormones and repeated activation of stress responses. And this load does not appear suddenly, it builds gradually, quietly, often unnoticed until it manifests as fatigue, irritability, sleep disturbances, or more serious health conditions. If we turn our attention inward, we might begin to notice how stress feels in the body, not as an abstract concept, but as a physical experience, a tightness in the chest, a heaviness in the shoulders, a racing heartbeat, shallow breathing. And these sensations are not random, they are part of the body's attempt to prepare for action, yet in many cases, there is no action to take, no predator to fight or flee from, and so the energy remains trapped, circulating within the system, creating a sense of restlessness or discomfort. This raises an important question. If stress is a natural response, why does it become harmful? And the answer lies not only in the presence of stress but in the absence of recovery and the perception of control. The human brain is uniquely capable of imagining the future, of replaying the past, of constructing narratives that extend beyond the present moment. And while this ability allows for planning and creativity, it also means that we can experience stress in anticipation of events that have not yet occurred or in response to memories that cannot be changed, effectively extending the stress response beyond its useful purpose. The body, however, remains in the present, responding to the signals it receives, and when those signals consistently indicate threat or uncertainty, the stress response remains active. Interestingly, research in psychophysiology suggests that the way we interpret stress can influence its impact on the body. Individuals who perceive stress as a challenge rather than a threat may experience different physiological responses, potentially mitigating some of the negative effects, which suggests that our mindset is not separate from our biology, but deeply intertwined with it. This does not mean that stress can simply be thought away, but it highlights the importance of awareness, of understanding the signals the body is sending, and responding to them with intention rather than resistance. Consider the role of breathing, something so simple, so constant, yet profoundly connected to the nervous system. Slow, deep breathing can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, often referred to as the rest and digest system, which counteracts the stress response, lowering heart rate, reducing blood pressure, and promoting a sense of calm. And this is not a psychological trick, it is a physiological mechanism, a direct pathway through which the mind can influence the body. Similarly, movement, whether through exercise or simple physical activity, provides an outlet for the energy mobilized by stress, helping to complete the cycle that was initiated by the stress response, allowing the body to return to equilibrium. Sleep, often overlooked, plays a critical role in regulating stress. During sleep, the body repairs itself, consolidates memory, and recalibrates hormonal systems. And without adequate sleep, the stress response becomes more easily triggered, more intense, and more difficult to regulate. Nutrition also plays a role, as the body requires a steady supply of nutrients to support the complex processes involved in managing stress, and imbalances can exacerbate the effects of stress on the body. What becomes clear through this exploration is that stress is not a single event but a dynamic process, an ongoing interaction between the external environment and the internal state of the body, influenced by perception, behavior, and biology. It is not something that can be completely avoided, nor should it be, because without stress, there would be no growth, no adaptation, no drive to overcome challenges, but the key lies in balance, in understanding when stress is serving a purpose and when it is becoming a burden. If we begin to see stress not as an adversary but as a messenger, we may become more attuned to the needs of our body, more capable of responding in ways that support rather than undermine our health. This requires a shift in perspective, from resisting stress to working with it, from ignoring the body's signals to listening to them, and this is where the integration of scientific understanding and self-awareness becomes powerful. The body is not working against you, it is working for you. Even when it feels uncomfortable, even when the signals are intense, they are part of a system that is trying to maintain balance, to protect, to adapt. And perhaps the most profound realization is that the relationship between stress and the body is not fixed, it is malleable, shaped by habits, environment, and mindset, which means that change is possible, not through force or suppression, but through understanding and alignment. When we align our actions with the needs of the body, when we create space for recovery, when we acknowledge the signals rather than dismiss them, we begin to transform the experience of stress from something that depletes us into something that informs us, guides us, and ultimately strengthens us in ways that are both deeply biological and deeply human.